Hello, welcome to this video about Venus-Neptune. So this video is for someone who has Venus in aspect to Neptune in their birth chart, and I'll explain more about exactly what that means and how we know that's happening in a moment. This can also apply if you are having Neptune in transit to your natal Venus. So transiting Neptune to Venus in your birth chart, or maybe you know someone who has this in their birth chart or by transit and you would like to get to know them better. This could also just simply be a video for you if you're interested in astrology and you want to get to know the planetary archetypes better. So my name is Shauna McGrath. I am a counseling astrologer and I'm excited to share this information with you. I want to make a caveat though, or a distinction between Venus-Neptune, or any aspect for that matter, within the birth chart versus a transit. So there's a few different things going on here. So someone's, your birth chart is a symbol of things that are with you throughout your lifetime. Now that can mean that these are themes that you experience over the course of your life. It can also mean that depending on the transits that are happening, that these themes kind of ebb and flow. Maybe there's a spike, so to speak, in Venus-Neptune issues in your life based on what's happening, based on the choices that you make, the circumstances that you find yourself in. Or they could be more steady, where it's over the course of your lifetime. Of course, if we're having a Neptune transit, that is something that I see where it has sort of a peak effect, but then at the same time, whatever it is that we experience, no one can take those experiences away from us. They change us, right? So I want you just to keep that in mind as I'm talking about these things, and to notice if these situations and these symbols are more present uniformly, or maybe there's certain periods in your life that you've noticed this more. And I would say that you would notice this more when you're having, again, transits to your Venus, or when I'm making this, we're having a Venus retrograde, so these issues may come up more during that time, etc. So, all right, I digress. So let's talk about generally what the planets symbolize. So Venus is a symbol of relationship, pleasure, beauty, sex, aesthetics, things that we're attracted to, things that we attract. I find Venus is interesting because it does also symbolize, by its very nature, the things that we're also repulsed by. So it can kind of have that, it can give you a lot of information regarding what it is that you are attracted to, or what it is that you attract, what it is that soothes you, that calms your nervous system. These are all Venus things. Venus does show us in your natal chart how it is that you connect with people. So we could say this is how you attach if you're into attachment theory. It shows us how you show up in relationship and the kinds of people that you're in relationship to. Now, Neptune is a symbol of illusion, of fantasy, spirituality, altered states of consciousness. Neptune is about dreams. It's about things that are ambiguous. So Neptune has this quality, especially when it's coming in as a transit, of sort of blurring the edges of reality. So when we see Neptune in the birth chart, or again by transit, it shows where things are meldable, they're moldable. People with a very prominent Neptune, so for example, Neptune conjunct the ascendant, or Neptune conjunct the moon or the sun especially, these people tend to be natural chameleons. So they can really blend and morph themselves into whatever environment they find themselves in. And so this is the case with Venus-Neptune as well. So Venus-Neptune shows that a person tends to really become melded and merged in with the people that they're in relationship with. And so this can mean high states of empathy, high states of connection and compassion. Neptune is also associated with creativity and sort of like divining creative ideas. So Venus-Neptune people are super creative as well, like very creative, aesthetically, arts, ideas. But because Venus is associated with visual arts and creation, there is this element around, especially cinema, filmmaking, writing, directing, even maybe if you have some more grounding qualities in your birth chart. Neptune is associated with the screen and cinema as well, because that in itself is an illusion. So like right here together, it looks as if I'm sitting here and chatting with you in person via this screen, but I'm not. So that is kind of, that gives you this feeling of Neptune, like it's there, but it's not there. And I want to say also that it's important to consider the type of aspect. And so is it a conjunction? Is it a square? Is it an opposition, etc.? So I find that the conjunction, typically any kind of Neptune conjunction with a personal planet, it shows where that person has a real challenge in defining themselves, in defining their own sense of self and maintaining boundaries, because Neptune is about blurring the boundaries. There are no boundaries with Neptune. And so people with Venus-Neptune in conjunction, there's really this call to figure out how to maintain your sense of self while being intimate with others. And I think that there's a lot that you can do around this as far as, you know, contemplation and self-reflection and building up a sense of self through knowing yourself. Also, creative outlets are very helpful as well. Let's see. Another challenging aspect, or another challenging part of Neptune is Neptune is associated with substance abuse, wanting to escape. And I think that whenever we talk about substance abuse or escapism in general, there is typically a morality judgment placed on it. And I want us to back away from that a little bit, because I find that with people that have a strong Neptune placement in their birth chart, and substance abuse in general, typically that person is trying to turn down the volume on their experience. And this is a self-protective measure. So Neptune also shows when someone is highly sensitive. It's also called sensory processing sensitivity. So this is where your nervous system is, the sensitivity on that is turned up. So this creates a person who is very aware of their surroundings. They tend to be very empathic. They can feel and see little nuances, and they can take on emotional energy. Now, along with that comes, again, of course, like high states of creativity and compassion, but it can also be difficult to maintain your own sense of self when there's not a consistent practice and there is a high sensitivity. So, so why I bring that up is because people who are challenged with their sensitivity, like if something feels like too much, there can be a tendency to turn towards substance abuse, or things that numb in general, like being a workaholic or being on social media or binge watching TV shows, things like this. So there's a spectrum of a way that this can happen. And so I think this is important to notice too, because people that have Venus-Neptune and people that have a strong Neptune in general, it's really important for them to make sure that they have plenty of downtime, plenty of solitary time, plenty of time to process feelings, emotions, energies, and that they have time to connect with their own internal energy before they go out into the world. And that it's important to watch for any kind of activity that would be used as a coping mechanism. So again, it's not that it's bad, it's your psyche is trying to protect you. And it's up to you to figure out, what coping mechanisms work best for you over the long term. Let's see. Okay, so I always like to put into these, what about highly sensitive people? Like, how does this apply specifically to highly sensitive or empathic types? I sort of jumped into that quickly, so I'll continue. So Neptune, it is a classic indicator of a highly sensitive person. So again, Neptune in aspect to any personal planet or point. So Sun, Moon, rising, Venus, of course, and then Mars as well, Mercury as well. I want to jump back to aspects for a moment. So I said conjunction is where there's this strong tendency to merge with other people. I find that the square aspect, so Venus square Neptune in your birth chart, or Neptune making a square aspect via transit, this can show where there's a challenge here. There's a challenge to integrate two different kinds of energies. And so I think people that have this in a square aspect, they're really mastering a sense of boundaries in relationships, a sense of intimacy without entanglement. Oppositions as well, although oppositions, it feels like it's more of a trade-off where there is balancing two polarities. And then there's also the trine and the sextile, which I think those, because things are flowing more harmoniously, there's a harmonious blend of the elements. I find that people don't struggle as much. Now, that's not to say that everyone doesn't struggle with having boundaries when Neptune is in aspect, but I find that there's more ease with the situation. The other piece of this too is that it depends on the context of your chart and the context of your life. So within the context of your life, a wonderful author regarding highly sensitive people, Elaine Aron, she wrote a book about highly sensitive people based on her research, and she found that children who had a dysfunctional upbringing, like where there was lots of uncertainty and emotional unavailability in the upbringing, those children that were highly sensitive had more challenges. They were more prone to depression, to anxiety, to substance abuse, versus highly sensitive children who had a stable and predictable upbringing. Those children had less issues with depression, anxiety, etc. And they actually had high levels of creativity and high levels of pursuing creative type work. So I share that with you because, everyone's childhood has ups and downs and lows, and some people had more difficult childhood experiences than others. But I share that with you because that gives us an understanding of where it is that we're working from. And if you did have an unstable upbringing, then it tells, and you have this aspect especially, it tells us that as a highly sensitive person that was put in a circumstance that was especially challenging, it requires even more support for you. So this means using your willpower to do things that that are good for you, but also finding support in the form of a therapist or counselors or helpers, mentors, and even practices that that are going to be very helpful for you. So I think that I know where I was going with this. This video is slightly Neptunian. I hope that it's not too all over the place for you. So my point with that is that we want to look at your circumstance personally, like what was your actual life like? What is your life like now, and how do we work with what it is that you've been given. And then the other piece of this too is to consider the dignity, the position that Venus is in within your birth chart. So what I mean by that is, what sign is Venus in? What house is Venus in? What other aspects is Venus in? And how well is Venus supported or challenged in your chart? So a person with Venus in, let's say, Taurus, which is Venus's rulership, is going to be experienced differently than a person with Venus in Scorpio, which is Venus's detriment. So it's not always black and white, like this is good, this is bad, but it does show us that where we need to put in some extra effort, or where we need to be a little bit creative in figuring out how to do Venus in a way that embodies your Venus energy. Let's see. And then of course it depends on all the other things that are happening in your chart too. So what is the emotional and energetic profile of you based on all of the other pieces in your chart? When you have multiple layers around Neptunian kind of things, like if you have some Pisces energy and some 12th house energy, that's going to emphasize all of these themes that we're talking about, versus if you have a lot of Capricorn and you have a lot of 4th house stuff, 10th house stuff, that may be bolstering and grounding for you. So I hope that makes sense. My point, what I want you to take away is that I'm sharing with you the themes of Venus-Neptune, but everyone is so unique and it really depends on a lot of different factors and how things work for you. Let's see. So as far as connections, like relationship styles within Venus-Neptune, this is a symbol that someone could be predisposed towards behaviors of codependence. So codependence is when you take responsibility for someone else's feelings or actions, or there's a tendency to try to save or to fix someone, and very often these are subtle but unconscious behavior patterns. Neptune is also a symbol of, or it can be a symbol of, the martyr or the victim. And so I want you, especially if you have this natally, I want you to notice where you may be taking responsibility for something that is not yours, or going in and trying to do something for someone when it either is not asked of you, or more importantly, it is a detriment to your own well-being. And this, again, it's not as simple and clear cut as it may seem. A lot of these things are very subtle. But that is one big thing that I find that comes up with Venus-Neptune. This does happen a lot. Melody Beattie talks about this in her book, Codependent No More, where codependent behaviors tend to happen very often when there is someone who is in relationship with a person who is addicted to a substance, or drinks a lot, or works a lot, and that kind of thing. So I want you to notice the kinds of relationships that you find yourself in and how you show up in relationship. When you show up, are you coming from a place of solid sense of self? How do you define yourself in relationship? Are you defined by the partner? These are all Venus-Neptune questions. Let's see. Okay, so so I have some recommendations for you, some tips for you regarding Venus-Neptune. So again, this is for your birth chart, or especially if you're having a Neptune transit. The biggest thing that you can do for yourself is to connect with yourself and your values, your preferences, your desires, what it is that you find pleasurable. This is going to be a good base for you to be in relationship. And the more that you can create this sense of self, that like there's a firmness there where you know who you are. And you know, I mean, again, it sounds simple, but people spend a lifetime figuring out who they are, but that is a big part of your life if you have Venus-Neptune, is to continuously go back to yourself while you're in relationship. There's also an element here of surrender when we're talking about Neptune. And so I think that it's paradoxical because surrender can only truly happen in a sustainable way when we first start with that first part of connecting to ourselves and having an inner strength, something to give from. But there is this sense with Neptune of you can't control it. This is not about control. This is not about having all of the answers. It's about exploring things through being curious and through following things that are interesting and intriguing and magical. Super helpful for you to have a creative outlet to do any kind of creative activity, and it doesn't have to be artwork per se, but even doodling, drawing, dancing, singing, playing a drum, anything like that. I would especially be like, look at your the rest of your chart too, like what your moon placement is telling you, like what is it that feeds your emotional center, and where can you sort of like find a creative outlet that works well with that. So for example, if you have moon in Gemini, maybe it's writing. If you have moon in Taurus, maybe it's cooking, and cooking is your creative outlet, that kind of thing. Let's see. So the last thing that I'll leave you with too, and then we'll summarize, is that it is possible for you to be in an environment and to not take on the energy of other people. The best way that you can do this is to have a regular practice that involves meditation or any kind of energy clearing work like Reiki or Diksha or anything like that. Anytime that you have Neptune in aspect to a personal planet, there is such an immense sensitivity that it requires that you do what I call an energetic shower, or having energetic hygiene. So we take a shower every day because we sweat and we're out in the world and we're doing stuff. And for you, same, or for all of us, I think really, same with your energy body. And so important to do practices like meditation to clear your energy and to focus yourself. So this is one of the biggest things that's going to make you more resilient in relationship. All right, so in summary, Venus-Neptune is about relationships that have an element of spirituality, sensitivity. There can be a tendency towards illusion and fantasy. I didn't talk about this a whole lot, but I also find that people with Venus-Neptune, they can experience a relationship more in their head and their fantasy than in real life. This is because Neptune is about fantasy, and so another part of this is a tendency to live in your own fantasy world and to be afraid of doing something in the material world, because then that would limit you. This can also, in the most challenging way, it can also be someone getting carried away with their fear fantasies, with getting caught up in the what ifs. And so this is why meditation and body work as well can be very helpful to give you an anchor to yourself. So if you have this in your birth chart or by transit, the best thing that you can do for yourself is to always come back to yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, and to have a sense of, I just like have this image of like you being this pillar, like a tree in your own life. That is your goal, and that's going to stabilize you. So I hope that you found this helpful. If you did, please leave me a comment and let me know. I am a counseling astrologer, so if that is something that you're interested in, reading, let me know. You can either email me at shaunamcgrath@gmail.com or book a session on my website under shaunamcgrathastrology.com. I'm wishing you a wonderful week, and I'll talk to you soon.